How's it going, y'all? Welcome back. It's Dakota, aka Boiler in Texas, and we are going to be breaking down the Purdue versus Wisconsin game this weekend on Friday night, a day earlier than normal, prime time on, at least prime time on a Friday evening. Purdue obviously coming off of their 35-20 loss to Syracuse last weekend. Very frustrating game where Purdue turned it over more times than I can count, and unfortunately just could not stop Schrader in the slightest. But nonetheless, we move forward now to talking about the Badgers. I don't think I can undersell it enough, exactly the streak that Wisconsin has been on over Purdue. It's been 16 games in a row that Wisconsin has beaten Purdue. But nonetheless, we play the games for a reason. We're going to chat about what's going to go down this weekend under a new Wisconsin system, offensive and defensive system, as they have a new head coach from last year. But they're not the only ones with a new coach, as Purdue also trots out a first-time coaching staff of their own in this game. And honestly, I'm excited for this one. I'm excited every weekend for Purdue football, and even as frustrating as it is on a Saturday the weekend before, usually about this time of the week, the following week, I'm so excited to see those Boilermakers trot out onto the field once again and try and come home with a win. So let's go ahead and let's talk about Wisconsin and kind of their season so far, and then we'll kind of break down, I think, the key points for Purdue and Wisconsin going into this one. So Wisconsin currently sits 2-1 on the season, wins over Georgia Southern and Buffalo, with their lone loss coming on the road at Washington State. They were dominated in their one loss, and they haven't looked particularly dominant in their other two wins as well. The biggest thing I've seen from Wisconsin so far is that they really are a second half team. I'm kind of looking at it game by game. And against Buffalo in their first game, they went into halftime up 14-10 before scoring 24 points in the second half to kind of run away with it. In their loss at Washington State, they scored 9 points in the first half before 13 points in the second. Now, obviously, that was a bit more of a lower scoring campaign, but they put the bulk of their points in the second half. And then even against Georgia Southern in their most recent game, they put up 7 points in the first half, actually go into the half tied against Georgia Southern before a 28-point second half to really seal it away. So it's definitely been a case of Wisconsin settling into the game and in the second half kind of asserting their will. And whether that's system related or personnel related, it's hard to tell. But it's definitely something that I think at this point is enough to say that it is a statistical likelihood. And I think that comes down to just keeping the game close. I think they've played maybe a little bit down and to their opponents a little bit. Obviously, going on the road, they were pretty much dominated by Washington State the whole way, and I think that kind of put a bad taste of from a lot of teams in them. But if we kind of take a look at the personnel, Tanner Mordecai, the quarterback for the Badgers, currently leading the way in this one with Chez Malusi. Actually, they're leading running back at this point. I think a lot of us are surprised that Braylon Allen hasn't been quite as involved as he has been even up to last year. The receiving core, I think, is pretty nonplus. I mean, they've thrown for 710 yards on the season and rushed for 612. So it's been a very balanced rushing attack. Although at times, if you watch the games, you can see that it doesn't feel as balanced as it probably should, as there have been plenty of times where you don't really see that, Wisconsin typical running back just dive up the middle, pound the other defensive line with big offensive line, big holes, and just pounding the rock on the ground. I mean, I talked about this on another podcast this week, but how many times in the recent years have we seen Wisconsin running backs go for 200-300 yard games? Not necessarily, being held to under 100 yards per game is not something that we're used to seeing. And so I think this is something that is going to be very important for the game this weekend. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I haven't really figured out the flow of how I want this specific podcast or video breakdown and preview to go. This is the first time I'm doing it, so we're all going to figure it out together. Let's just talk about the key points for Purdue versus Wisconsin. Wisconsin, like I mentioned, has been a very slow starting team, a very second half heavy team. And this just feels like one of those games where if you can keep the game weird, keep the game close, don't turn the ball over, consistently sustain drives and keep the game within touch, I think this bodes very well for Purdue. Obviously, I think the biggest thing that we've seen from this Purdue team is lack of execution on offense at points, and obviously very lack of execution on defense, allowing opposing teams to get kind of whatever they want, get in a rhythm. I think if Purdue is able to keep this game relatively close, even if it just turns into an offensive shootout, which I don't necessarily think it's going to, just because I think the Purdue defensive line is going to do enough to not necessarily stifle Wisconsin's running attack forever, but I do think they will be good enough to keep the game close enough as the game wears down. I think depth on the defensive line is going to be a big question mark, especially late in the second half. Even though this is a new Wisconsin system under a new head coach, I do think that as the game wore on, and I saw this against when they played Georgia Southern, that they really didn't pound the rock on the ground that much in the first half. But once they got into the second half and the Georgia Southern defense kind of started to wear down, that's when we saw the rushing attack kind of come in good on its own. The two-headed monster of Chez Malusi and Braylon Allen, I think it doesn't really even need that much of an explanation. I mean, Chez Malusi is averaging almost 7 yards a carry, and Braylon Allen is averaging over 7 yards a carry. And so this is definitely going to be a make your sure tackles and try and limit them as best you can. I don't think you're going to successfully stifle them like Purdue did against Virginia Tech, but I do think that it could be close enough to try and make Wisconsin more one-dimensional through the air. And I know that feels a little blasphemous, but it definitely seems to be more of a thing than not. I mean, Tanner Mordecai has already thrown over 100 pass attempts this season. He's only thrown 2 touchdowns, but he has thrown 2 interceptions as well. And so he's definitely been more than serviceable. And while he has shown a willingness to go to the ground in terms of using his legs, it's definitely not going to be to the level of extent that we saw with Garrett Schrader from Syracuse. And so I think while he may pick up plays here or there with his legs, I'm hoping that, especially after playing Syracuse, that this defensive coaching staff will have our team ready to play against a quarterback who can use his legs. But thankfully, it seems like he's not going to be able to do as much in terms of on the ground. In terms of the passing game, it definitely seems like Braylon Allen seems to be one of the more targeted in the receiving game. He has 15 receptions for 41 yards. He definitely is seems to be that check down, swinging out of the backfield type of route that safety valve is the word I was trying to think of, that they've been able to utilize when the offensive line maybe can't get the protection that it needs. Otherwise, looking at the other receivers, they have Skylar Bell with 13 receptions and Will Pauling with 11, both of which 105 and 149 yards respectively. They have another receiver over 100 yards, which is I'm going to go with Kamir Dyke. 8 receptions for 161 yards. He has one of their receiving touchdowns on the year, with Skylar Bell also having the other. This definitely seems like a more balanced Wisconsin team that we've seen in the past, and I think it could come down to getting off the field on third down and not making the same mistakes that we made against Syracuse. And so if we were really just going to lay out the bullet points, I think it's going to come down to, for Purdue's defense, to stifle the run as much as possible, get off the field on third and long, and don't let up any massive plays through the air. I think that kind of breaks down enough. I mean, it's obviously, if you do that every game, I think you're going to do pretty well. But I think this is a Wisconsin team that not necessarily as polished on offense, and that I don't think is going to be able to do the same thing that we've seen when they played Purdue in the past. It definitely feels like an odd Wisconsin team. I know a lot of the pundits online are really down on Wisconsin this year, even considering their 2-1 record. But their one game against Washington State on the road definitely didn't breed much confidence in the Badgers, and I think it could be an interesting opportunity. I think a lot of people online on Twitter and in the reporting world definitely are looking at Purdue as an underdog in this one. I think the betting lines obviously do that in itself, and so I think this potentially sets up for a very big game for Purdue in this season. You lose a game like Syracuse, but if you bounce back, and I'm even setting with the name Wisconsin aside, to bounce back the next week on a Friday night in front of hopefully a packed night-to-game atmosphere in Ross-Ade. It was absolutely incredible last week, and I think it will be again this week. It is going to be a Friday night, but I think it'll happen regardless. And like I said, if we can just keep it weird on defense when Wisconsin has the ball, kind of keep them guessing, maybe even make them one-dimensional and try and make it through the air, I think that bodes very, very well for us, even with the issues that our secondary has had. I just don't see Wisconsin, even now, as a team that is going to beat you through the air like other teams might. But let's go ahead. Let's flip it on its head. Let's talk about when Purdue has the ball. The Wisconsin defense obviously has done good enough throughout the year to hold Buffalo to 17 and hold Georgia Southern to to a handful of 14 points. But it's also been a bit odd to see at the same time that they haven't necessarily been as, solid defensively as you've seen in the past. They've definitely had a propensity of letting up the odd play here or there, and definitely not been able to be as efficient on defense as we've seen in years past. And whether that has to do with the changing of the guard and the head coaching position or not, time will tell. I think the keys for when Purdue is on offense is, I think, again, it's easy to say after a game like Syracuse, but take care of the ball. I think if Purdue can get back to the disciplined football they were playing against Fresno State and Virginia Tech and really just limit turnovers, at this point, Purdue's had their monstrous turnover game of the year. And so if they end up in this game with one, I don't think that's going to be too bad. But if we can get through this game with 0 or 1 turnovers, I think that bodes very well. I think the Syracuse game, obviously with the number of turnovers and untimely turnovers at that we had, bodes very well for our offense. We were moving the ball very, very well and efficiently at times through the air, not so much on the ground. I'd love to see more of that, get back to that and get Devin Mockabee and Tyrone Tracy back in the mix and allow them to continue to try and establish a ground game. But with that said, our offensive line obviously is still a bit up in the air at times, and so I can see why they kind of move away from it as the game goes on. But I think if Purdue takes care of the ball, we have the receiving weapons also. I think there's been a lot of talk in between games about how Purdue doesn't have, a true number one wide receiver. And while I do think Deion Burks is that guy, they haven't necessarily targeted him as we've seen Purdue teams of the past target a single receiver. Think Rondell Moore in 2018, think David Bell, think Charlie Jones. And so I think that actually bodes very, very well. Wisconsin has one of, I think, the best cornerbacks in coverage this year. Who he ends up guarding will probably be Deion Burks. But with that said, TJ Sheffield has had a very productive season so far. Ramon Yassin led the way against Syracuse in receiving yards, and I think he started to come on very, very strong. At the tight end spot, you have a very positive surprise in Max Clare. That I think has been a very, very good safety valve and check down kind of relief for Hudson Card. That I think he's been very, very productive. And then out of the backfield, you still do have Tyrone Tracy or Devin Mockabee who can kind of break a run at any given point should the moment arise. And while ball security is kind of a bit of an issue with I think Mockabee right now, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of run he gets this weekend against Wisconsin. It was a very uncharacteristic, I'm hoping a very uncharacteristic game for Mockabee, losing the ball that many times in a single game. Hopefully that lit a fire under him to kind of get that under control, because I think we'll need him. I think we'll need him in his size and his shiftiness in this one to kind of keep it hopefully in our favor. But I think when it comes to the key points of Purdue on offense, I think it comes down to a few key points. Limit turnovers. Establish some sort of running game. Do not become just one-dimensional through the air as we've ever so want to see through this program. And I know we are, an air raid offense, but at the same time, allowing a defense to just hone in exclusively on a passing attack, I don't think is going to bode very well. And so we have to get something on the ground, whether that's Hudson Card, getting him out of the pocket, allowing him to use his legs and athleticism to our advantage to potentially make some stuff happen, potentially even picking up easy yards on the ground. I think that could also be a huge addition to this. And then third and lastly, I think it's going to be all about sustaining drives. Keep the Purdue defense as fresh as possible and convert when in the red zone. All of these are very simple and very obvious, and you can say for almost every game. But we saw against Syracuse, as the defense wore down thanks to the turnovers and just staying on the field for long stretches of time, it wears you down, and it's so hard to stay disciplined and sound in your assignments as you're on the field that much. And so if Purdue can keep it close, if Purdue can make it weird, if they can win the turnover battle, I think there's a real shot here. That's the weird thing about this team. While you see them in games like Syracuse where they looked dominated all game long, if you actually take a look at the individual segments, you saw them do some really good things. They were sustaining drives on offense before an untimely turnover. They were limiting the production of Syracuse outside of Garrett Schrader fairly effectively. I mean, obviously Schrader shredded them for 200 plus yards through the air and on the ground, but if you look everywhere else, the numbers actually looked pretty good. And so this is a team that I feel like, obviously depending on the game, but in a game like this where at home on a Friday night under the lights against a team that Purdue hasn't beaten in 2 decades, even then it still just feels like there's a weird air about it. And it's a weird air about this team that all it's going to take is just one monstrous performance and one night where it just all clicks for something to go right for us. And I think it's possible to see. That's the thing about this team. It's always going to feel possible. And even now I'm sitting here talking to myself, potentially even thinking that Purdue could pull it off. Or Purdue could lose by 3 touchdowns. Who knows? But if Purdue can take care of the ball like they did against Fresno State and against Virginia Tech, I think we have a very, very good shot of at least keeping it close. And who knows? At that point, once you hang around for long enough, weird things happen, and you never know how the game is going to end. But I think I've rambled on for long enough. I think it's going to be a very fun game. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be so much fun to see. I can't wait to watch. I hope if you're able to go to the game, I hope you enjoy it. Take some pictures, send me videos. I want to see this environment. And I pointed it out this week that it's been way too long since I've been to a game in Ross-Ade. So I'm already kind of thinking in the back of my head about ways to remedy that. But that'll do it for me here. What do you guys think is going to happen? Let me know either on Twitter or if you're watching this on YouTube in the comments. And if you are listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, go ahead, hit that review button, hit the follow button. We're going to be doing multiple episodes of these after every football game, previewing the next game as well as talking about the one that just happened. But that'll do it for me here. We'll see you after the Wisconsin game. Hopefully Purdue comes out with a weird victory. I don't think any of us would mind. But that'll do it for me here. And as always, boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue.